Om Niranjanam Nityam Anantarupam Bhaktanukampa Dhritavigraham Vai Ishavataram Parameshamidyam Tam Ramakrishnam Shirasa Namama Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagatgurum Padapadme Tayo Sritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu Namasri Yatirajaya Vivekananda Surai Satchid Sukhaswarupaya Swamine Tapaharini. So now we will continue with our study of Swami Vivekananda's Karma Yoga. We were studying the second chapter. Each is great in his own place. And we have proceeded quite into the chapter. And we were studying that portion from the Mahanirvana Tantra, where the householders' duties have been enunciated, has been described, that how an ideal householder ought to conduct his life or her life. That has been very nicely depicted in the Mahanirvana Tantra, which even today proves to be something which can as if guide us. The guidelines which has been provided there has a great implication even in the modern society. So we will share the text from the portion which we are supposed to discuss today. So, householder's duty towards his wife was described in the last class. We just were describing those portions. Today, the Mahanirvana Tantra is going to describe the duties towards the children. So the following are duties towards children. A son should be lovingly reared up to his 4th year. He should be educated till he is 16. When he is 20 years of age, he should be employed in some work. He should then be treated affectionately by his father as his equal. Exactly in the same manner, the daughter should be brought up and should be educated with the greatest care. And when she marries, the father ought to give her jewels and wealth. So here, it's mentioned that till the 4th year, the child is just to be nurtured, and the education starts in those days. As even now, you will find that in the traditional families, it's still there. The 3 varnas, the Brahman, the Kshatriyas, and the Vaishyas. In those 3 varnas, actually, the custom of Upanayana was there. So the 4th year, when the child is about to enter the stage of brahmacharya, of learning. So the Upanayana, after the Upanayana, one becomes Dvija. Upanayana is an initiation. The word Dvija means the one who has been born twice. The first was the biological birth, and now the birth which is going to happen is the child's intellectuality and the spirituality. That is as if to be born now at the age of 4. So that's why after that initiation, after that Upanayana, he becomes Dvija, the one who is born twice. The literal meaning of the word Dvija is actually the egg. The egg, you know that when the fledglings comes out from the egg is the first birth, the fledgling is the second birth. So the same thing happens even though physically we are not going to be born again. But intellectually, spiritually, our second growth, our birth starts as if after the Upanayana. So at the age of 4, they enter the state of brahmacharya, and till 16. Till 16 is mentioned, actually it is this, from 4th to the 16th, the child is supposed to stay with the guru, in the guru griha. This the concept of guru griha vasa was there. They have to leave their home, stay with the teacher. The idea was that education actually is more by observation than just through instruction. An ideal person, the guru is an ideal person who has inculcated the values in his life, the spiritual values in his life, even in his day-to-day life, the way he is leading the life apart from the instruction is something which by observing subconsciously the students learn all those values. So that's why even nowadays when the concept of Guru Griha Vasa is not there, the parents is bound to take the role of the guru. We should always remember as the parents in our house what we instruct our children. That's of not much importance. How we are behaving in our day-to-day life. That's the thing which is more important. Because a child is a very minute observer. And what the child observes subconsciously, it enters into its psyche, and that's the thing. It starts almost imitating. It's just like this mirror image starts imitating the thing which we find in the parents. I still remember I had to spend long years, about more than 12 years when I was in India with the educational institutions run by the Ramakrishna Mission. And for the first time when I was posted, my responsibility was to be with the students. And from Belur Math, our headquarters, the instruction which was given was very interesting, very nice. One of the assistant secretaries, Revered assistant secretaries, told me a very interesting thing. He told that you are going with an notion that almost throughout the day you have to keep a minute watch on the students, because it's a residential school. So naturally, our duty is as if to keep a minute watch on the students. And then he told, but remember, it's not you who will be watching them. Don't think that's the only thing. The students will be constantly watching you, and always be aware of that fact. And then you will find that half of the work is done. That students are constantly watching you. So that's the type of life you are supposed to live. That don't think that you are there as just one who is watching them. It is they who are watching you. And that was the idea in the Guru Griha Vasa, that was the idea. Now, when the children are brought up at home, the parents have that tremendous responsibility that how they are behaving in their household, with their other members, with their own wife or with the husband, how they are leading the life. That entails that what type of character traits they are as if imparting to their children. So here we find that up to 16. And then what he says, that when he's 20 years of age, he should be employed in some work. Now then what happens from 16 to 20, the question comes. So we should remember that how the castes got crystallized in India. It was actually social necessity. It had nothing to do with the religion. Sometimes we mistake that the caste is a part of Hindu religion. No, it was actually part of the society. Nowadays, when we complete our 12th standard examination, it's almost the age of 16, then we think of some professional course. And for that, the colleges are there. Universities are there. In those days, it was the family. A goldsmith's family is going to train their children. There were no such professional institutions. Were there to train their children the skills. So these, after 16 to 20, just the way now, after the higher secondary, we go for the professional courses. So they need not have to go. they will return from their Guru Grihavasa. They had the instructions of dharma, they have inculcated dharma. That was the main trend. Now, all those occupational skills, they were supposed to get trained from their parent, from the father. So that's how the 16 to 20, he's staying with his father. Now he's quite grown up, and the father is now the teacher of all the skills. So all those caste crystallization came because the competition was what? That if I divulge the skills, I lose my profession. So that's how the castes got crystallized in the olden days. And nowadays they're all falling off with the modern educational system. Naturally they are falling off. There is no question. Anyone can have the pursuit for any of the profession, whatever may be the irrespective of his caste and all, because all the educational institutions are there. But in those days, that was the trend. From the 16, they come back from the Guru Griha, and then they are being trained in the skills which his father's profession is actually, as per the family heritage, his father is going to instruct his child on the skills, and the child is also going to continue that family profession. So that was the thing. That's why 16 to 20 is meant for developing the skills under the guidance of the parents, mainly the father. So then once he's grown up, now he should be treated affectionately by his father as his equal. At the age of 20, now he has developed the skills. Now he becomes a colleague of his father. The same profession, they are going to work together. Now they are the colleagues. So father is no more to treat him as a student. Now the child has become his equal. Exactly the same manner, the daughter should be brought up and should be educated with the greatest care. The same way, it's not only the son. We find that because of that, we gradually our culture was eroded, and we find that the girls are there not to be as if educated in the way the boys are there just for doing the household duties. It was not the case. In the Mahanirvana Tantra, these are all extracts from there. So there it is specifically mentioned, exactly in the same manner, the daughter should be brought up and should be educated with greatest care. And then this line, which many may object to, and when she marries, the father ought to give her jewels and wealth. Clearly there is a mention of dowry. And many may say that yes, the evil lies here. But one thing we should never forget, why the father ought to give her jewels and wealth? Because each and every children, the son, the daughter, are all entitled to inherit. The son is also entitled to inherit, and the daughter is also entitled to inherit. Now the son, because of the family profession, is going to continue to stay with his father. The daughter is going to the in-laws' house. Now naturally, here comes the question of the equal, that the son and the daughter should be treated alike. As she is going to the in-laws' house, she also inherits. So the father is just giving her the jewels and wealth as her inheritance. The problem of dowry comes when the in-law starts demanding. When the father is giving as per his provision, as per his capability, it's a very, very nice idea. But the problem we find in the society in the name of dowry is when the in-law starts claiming, undue claims come, and then that's the problem. That's nowhere mentioned. The scripture very nicely is actually doing justice to both the son and the daughter in a very nice way. So there we find that as the daughter is going to the in-laws' house, the father's responsibility is to arrange her marriage, and then she is to go to the in-laws' house, and as she also have the same right of inheritance as the son. So father now just shares the property in such a way that she is not deprived. So that's why she marries, and the father ought to give her jewels and wealth. Then the duty of the man is toward his brothers and sisters. So you will find that how nicely the first duty is towards the wife, then towards the children, Now the family, he's gradually projecting what towards the brothers. After doing that, then if that he has the means, he can just go and even extend his family by trying to help out his brothers and sisters and towards the children of his brothers and sisters if they are poor, and towards his other relatives, his friends and his servants. So, being the earning member, the wealth is not just to be accumulated. So, yes, if I have the capacity, I have the capability to earn, then why not move out and serve? That wealth just by accumulating will serve no purpose. It just is a mere obsession. Just it gives me a satisfaction that yes, such and such wealth is there in my bank, but it serves no purpose. And that's why nowadays it's a very common proverb that which is used among the obsessed person who are very much obsessed with their rich. It is it is told that they're so poor, they have nothing apart from money. They're extremely poor. They have only money, nothing else. No heart, no feeling, that no sense of empathy. So actually the householder is the unit from where all other, the brahmacharyas, the grihasthas, the vanaprasthas, all have to depend on the grihastha. So he, as after taking care of the primary duty towards the wife, towards the children, now if there is sustenance, he should move out and try to help the brothers, sisters, their children, if they are poor, and towards his relatives, his friends, and his servants. In this context, I suddenly remember one of a very nice incident in the life of Swami Vivekananda. Now, Swami Vivekananda's father was a very generous person. He used to earn, but he never thought of saving. He was in those days an attorney, so his earning was quite good. But he had an extended family, joint family. And whoever came for help, he will just simply help them. Now, Vivekananda, as Narendranath, was growing up. He was growing up, and then he saw that father is not saving as if anything for them. So one day he went to father and protested. The way that anyone asks you any wealth, you just give away. What do I inherit? Now, Swami Vivekananda's father was really a man of very open heart with a broad vision. Immediately he replied something which is very, very interesting. He told, what do you inherit? Go and stand in front of the mirror, and then you will realize what you inherit. Very nice thing he told. What he actually meant, that till now you have been nourished, you have been educated. And for that, whatever has to be done, we have done. Just go and see your own this personality in front of the mirror. You will understand what we have done. After this, if we are supposed to do, that means you have not grown. Our duty was to make you a self-reliant person. We have done that. What more inheritance do you ask for? So go and stand in front of the mirror. And then Swamiji objected, but the money which you give, I know among our relatives, some are just using that money for all sorts of negative things. Just they are addicted to some tobacco or some type of drugs, and they spend the money, waste the money that way. His father, yes, there we will find, that's why that like father, like son. His father's reply was something which Swamiji never forgot. His father told, in this world of suffering, if for a moment you can give happiness to any person, no, that much alone is truth. Everything else is trash. Means from what type perspective his father told, we don't know. But Swamiji really felt that how big-hearted his father was. And this became something, a mission for his life. That in this world of suffering, that if you can give a little happiness to any person, know that alone to be true. That instead of judging the people, we just do that. We do nothing but we go on judging. Of course, we are not supposed to provide the money for the drugs, but instead of judging, if we take the real intention of those words, instead of just judging, if we try to reach out to do some good to them, that so that it alleviates their suffering, that alone is true. Just by sitting and just putting tags on other person that he is good and he is bad serves no purpose. So just forget. Just don't put on tags on your relative, on your own relatives by saying he is good, he is bad, he shouldn't be helped and all. When anyone comes for favor, if you have means, have faith. The faith is a very important thing. In life, faith is a very important thing. Why? You know, if you have faith, there is a chance you may be deceived. But out of 100, there is a chance of to be deceived is 1 or 2. Know it for certain, when you have faith in others, they also respond in responsibility. In 98% cases, it will be the responsibility. Just it seems someone has raised hand. As per the means our norms, you keep the question in mind. At the end, we will have some time. At that time, we will answer your question. Okay. So now let us continue with the discussion. So as we were discussing that that when you are towards the other person, instead of judging, we need not judge. We need not judge. We just move out. And that if you have faith, that the thing which we were just discussing, the faith, that whether we should have faith or we should first doubt and try and have some suspicion. Yes, if we are so alert and have suspicion, yes, most probably we will never be befooled. But we forget one thing. When we have faith in others, yes, out of 100, maybe 2 or 3 cases, we may be befooled. But in 98% of the cases, we will find that our faith has been actually been reciprocated in a very responsible way. So now it's up to us. That just as we will be getting befooled for 2% cases, is it proper to deprive those 98% for who would have really got that help from me? So it's better in life to have that unconditional faith. Know it for certain. The plan of the universe is such, when you have faith in others, in 98% of the cases, their faith will be responded with responsibility. Yes, there will be a few cases where you will be befooled, but I cannot just pay the price of not being befooled by those 2% at the cost of not doing what I'm supposed to do for those 98%. Just for this 2%, I just leave it out. So better to have faith. And that's what Swamiji's father was doing. And he was trying to reach out. Whenever anyone came for help, it's not that Swamiji must probably have noticed the one who were using drugs, but there were some who were genuinely in need, and his father's help was really helping them, he was reaching out and helping them for some purpose which was genuine. So that's the thing which we should always remember. Then his duties are towards the people of the same village and the poor and anyone that comes to him for help. Having sufficient means, if the householder does not take care to give to his relatives and to the poor, know him to be only a brute. He is not a human being. Now this is the culture, This Vedic culture, you will find that sometimes in India, the background we are going in India, because that's the place where these things were cultured. So sometimes people find that as per the overall government system is concerned, we find the infrastructure is quite poor. When there is some disaster, the most probably from the government, the means which are taken is not sufficient. But you will find the entire society is sustained because of this culture. It is something ingrained in us. Even a poor, as a wandering monk, Swamiji is saying that as a monk, in this type of culture, we never starve. Even you go to a poor man's house, with all his means, he will serve the guest. That was in that culture. That every day, what the food which you cook, some portion was supposed to be kept for any guest. Guests are called in Indian culture atithi. You know the word, what's the meaning of the word atithi? Atithi. Tithi means date and means particular time. You know, what's the tithi today? You will ask. That's how they used to depict the date. Now, atithi means the one whose coming has no tithi. Anytime they may appear. Anytime they may appear, and we should serve them as if God has come to my house. Just the words we just as we indicated, you know, in any culture, if you want to, in any society, if you know its culture, you study its language. In the language, its culture is hidden. Let's just see what a wonderful word the atithi is. Anytime he may come, whether I am poor or rich, as per my provisions, some portion I have to keep for them anytime they may come, and I should be there to serve him. So just see what a wonderful structure of the society we had, that as a Vedic culture. That the goodness was something which need not be imposed by some infrastructure. It should come out from within. Nowadays in sociology they say that the biggest mistake we were doing for the last few decades is we were trying to bring all social reformation from top to bottom. That we just set out some norms which the society should follow. And it never worked. One after other, all the isms failed. Was there fault in the isms? No. The way it was tried to be implanted, the fault was there. The ism should be implemented from within to without. If each and every one has that tendency, has developed that heart to reach out to the society and help others, that's from bottom to top. Everyone has the awareness of their responsibility to do something for the others. Otherwise, what happens? I think I just give the tax, the rest of the responsibility is with the government, and we in no way feel inclined to really just move out and reach out to help others. That wonderful faculty never grows in us. So here was the society where the responsibility was in each and every unit of that society, of the Grihastha, that how they should build, that the entire societal structure was such a wonderful thing. And so you will find that whenever there's a disaster, crisis, it's the common people who are coming out, reaching out, helping people. It is something wonderful that sustains that culture even now. Sometimes people are surprised with such a poor infrastructure, how the country is sustained. It is sustained because of these values, wonderful values, which still now, there are so many stories. You know, even when our Swamis go out in India for relief, I still remember that we used to go to Sundarbans. There also, there are so many villages, very poor people there. So for distributing textbooks and then school uniforms, some winter clothing, we used to just go by boat, by some steamer from village to village, because it's full of this rivers. And one of our Swamis, he's now a trustee, his relates to a very nice experience. That at night, when the villagers has offered him a place for taking rest, for sleep, he found a wonderful thing. That when he woke up in the morning, he found that he was sleeping just, you know, it's a hot and humid climate. He was sleeping in the courtyard outside. And he found encircling him at quite a distance, there are many people who have just slept there throughout the night. So he was puzzled. He never knew that why they have to encircle him and sleep. And when he woke up and he asked, what's the matter? Why were you not in your own home? Why were you encircling me and sleeping? And what they told was something very amazing. They told, Swamiji, when you don't know that here anytime the Royal Bengal tiger It's in this the Sundarban. It is infested. It has so many tigers, and it's very common that they attack at night. They come to the villages, and there may be they will just any human can be an easy prey to that. Now you don't know you felt it's very warm and humid. You were sleeping outside. We felt if the tiger comes, you will be an easy target. So we thought that you have to be protected. If the tiger comes, not our guest, some of us may be the target, but the guest should be saved. Just see how these ordinary people have inculcated these wonderful values, these traditions, how even unknowingly the people have just inculcated. That's the wonder of this culture. These people, they feel that they are even ready to risk their life. Why? The guest should be saved. He is here to serve us. He came to just distribute all these books, uniform, clothing to our children. And he should be treated as God. He should be saved. It is we who are there to risk our lives. So that's the idea we'll find. That even those who are extremely poor, they are also having that type of attitude. So when Swamiji went out, he used to still remember when in the West, that when all the luxury, all the food with which he was served in the American society, he told nothing was compared to the simple that meal which he used to get as a wandering monk from the hut of the poor. That how with so much of love and devotion, that coarse chapatis, that coarse bread they used to give, that used to be so delicious because it was full of love. So that's the idea, there's a culture which we see has actually been depicted very nicely in this Mahanirvana Tantra. If the householder does not take care to give to his relative and to the poor, know him to be only a brute, he is not a human being. Excessive attachment to food, clothes, and the tending of the body and dressing of the hair should be avoided. No luxury. Very interesting. This Mahanirvana Tantra is saying the householder should earn money, but be very cautious not for just pure indulging in luxury. In this world of consumerism, these cultures we have all totally forgot. That money I earn, so I have the full control over it. If I find that with that I have sustained myself, now it is there for my luxury. It's just I go out to any supermarket which is full of things which I don't need. They are only my wants. They say that needs are seeds and wants are weeds. That it is full of that weeds, and we move out with the total that's the consumerism culture. And contrast to that, what a wonderful thing. Here's a wonderful example I will give from the life of this Birla, G.D. Birla. The Ghanshyam Das Birla, he is a very renowned industrialist, and he used to fund a lot for the Indian freedom movement. Before the freedom, he was a man who was of the pre-independence. And now, he had a huge, at that time his industry was really flourishing. He was a very rich man. Now when he was instructing his children, Aditya Birla is reminiscing this, that whenever father used to live a very, very simple life. And whenever he will instruct, we have a tendency as a young person to spend more in some luxuries. It's very natural. The father was always there to pinpoint that try to live a simple life. And at the same time, he used to stress, but go for business, go out. Try to have profit as much as possible. Of course, in proper way, not by deceiving someone. Have profit, and then you lead a simple life. Then what you do with the money? Go for another business. The children were really a bit amused that you ask us to lead a very simple life, and at the same time you go on asking us for earning more and more so that we can start more and more business. What for? Then what G.D. Birla replied was something very interesting. He told the more you go out for that more you businesses you have, the more people will become self-reliant. They will earn. You create a scope for earning. Just see what a wonderful vision. That business also can become a wonderful service if we have a proper vision. It can become a spirituality if we have a proper vision. That you have go for profit, go for more and more business, and that way more and more people will be earning. We still remember when Swami Vivekananda was in the West, and that time there was a terrible famine in India. And another direct disciple of Ramakrishna, Swami Akhandananda, he started a wonderful relief work in Murshidabad, in one of the districts of Bengal, which was highly affected by the famine. And we find there are so many letters Swamiji is really encouraging, appreciating that what a wonderful thing. This is religion in practice. This is spirituality in practice. To serve the God in man, you have shown the way out. That has become for us a way. So the entire Ramakrishna mission now always acknowledges the fact that what Akhandanandaji has started, that's the thing which we are still following. So Swamiji was highly in praise of Akhandananda. After a few months, we find another letter of Swami Vivekananda, which may apparently surprise us. He's writing, stop all those almshouses which you have started. And by that time, the famine condition has improved. And now Swamiji is writing, stop. And what he's saying, if you go on distributing the wealth to a particular village, the entire wealth of the world, you go on just simply donating to a particular village, one day you know it for certain, it will be exhausted. And again, they will spread out their hands. The real service is to make a man stand on his own feet. See what a wonderful foresight he had. And the same thing which we find is being instructed by G.T. Birla, that make the man self-reliant. Let them earn something. Let them work and earn. Just don't distribute the wealth. So go for more and more business. Make them self-reliant. And at the same time, don't resort to luxury. So what a wonderful ideal we find is being depicted here. So excessive attachment to food, clothes, and the tending of the body and the dressing of the hair should be avoided. The householder must be pure in heart and clean in body, always active and always ready for work. So that's the thing. This pure in heart speaks of this empathy. The more you are pure in heart, that purity finds expression through love, through compassion, through empathy. So this pure in heart and clean in body. This cleanliness is also very important. The clean in body, household should be clean, because it is the cleanliness is next to godliness. Because the more we are clean, we will find it's immediately reflected. Our psyche is reflected by our physical existence. If you are very clean, if you try to always be neat and clean, you will find your mind is also very neat and clean. Because to remain clean, apart from keeping the body clean, in your household, to keep the household clean, you have to be very, very tidy, to keep the things in proper places. That regiments your mind. And that's how it helps to purify your mind. So cleanliness, in turn, the external cleanliness in turn helps to a great extent for the internal cleanliness. So the householder must be pure in heart and clean in body, always active and always ready for work. To his enemies, the householder must be a hero. Them he must resist. That is the duty of the householder. So here you must probably remember, Swamiji, when he started this chapter, he started with the idea that the highest ideal is resist not evil. So now here is, after we have found out that that is the highest ideal for the one who has the highest spiritual realization. But till we are not up to it, just by imitating it, we will be just deceiving ourselves as well as our own household as well as the society. So, for as a householder, the duty is to resist. That is the duty of the householder. He must not sit down in a corner and weep and talk nonsense about non resistance. It is just like when a strong man is just thrashing a weak person, and the weak person is constantly saying, "Oh, I forgive you." What's the meaning of that forgiveness? You don't have the power to resist. How can you just simply forgive him? So develop that power of resistance. Now, here there is a wonderful story of Ramakrishna. That yes, as a householder, to protect my family, to protect my society, I have to resist. But what should be the nature of the resistance? Swami Ramakrishna used to narrate a wonderful parable to explain our attitude. That resistance is of course needed, but what's the attitude? The parable of a snake and a brahmachari. Many of you know, but as it is something in this context, let us relate it. That there was a very poisonous snake in a village. It used to live in a hole besides a tree. And all the children of the village were scared. They never used to come near that tree because they knew that there is a snake which is very poisonous and it will bite them. It unnecessarily you will attack others and bite them. So one day a brahmachari was passing through that village and he was about to take his route by the side of the tree. And all the villagers came running, the children especially came running and warned him, "Sir, please don't go that way." Well, why? Well, there's a very poisonous snake. And it is very aggressive. Without any reason, it attacks and it will bite you. The brahmachari assured them, "You need not worry. I know the ways to pacify that snake. I have the power to pacify. I will pacify it." So as the brahmachari is near that tree, the snake, as usual, comes out in aggression and is about to just bite the brahmachari. The brahmachari had some power. So he pronounced some spells and the snake was immediately pacified. And now the brahmachari started instructing that why you unnecessarily attack others? Why are you so aggressive? Why you do harm to others? That way it doesn't serve you in any way. It is actually doing you harm. As per your spiritual progress is concerned, it is doing you harm. I will give you some mantra and you go on repeating it and try to be totally non-violent, and you will find a wonderful change is coming within you. With this instruction, after initiating the snake somehow, because of the power of the brahmachari, was pacified and was influenced by his instruction, and the snake actually agreed to follow the instructions of the brahmachari. And after the brahmachari left, after many years, the brahmachari returned. And again, when he was passing through that way, he asked the villagers, "Is the snake there?" "No, it has died." "It has died?" "Yeah." So now that the snake somehow the children found is not attacking, and so they just started throwing stones on it. It was very badly hurt and it has died. The brahmachari couldn't believe. He knew the mantra which he has given, unless there's a real evolution, spiritual evolution, nothing can kill that snake. So now the snake, this brahmachari, just simply ignores what was told to him. He goes towards the tree, and now seeing the guru, from the hole the snake comes out, but it was just crawling. Somehow it managed to come out to just show his respect to his guru. And now seeing the condition of the snake, the brahmachari asked, "How it has happened? How you are so weak, so emaciated?" The snake at the beginning, he has become so non-violent that he even forgot, because there is no sense of revenge. So he has totally forgot that incident. He told, most probably I take only dry leaves. I don't just kill any other animal or any anything, any living thing for my food. I just sustain myself on dry leaves. That's why most probably I got emaciated. The brahmachari immediately responded. He told, that cannot be the reason. There must be something else. Please try to remember. And then the snake remembered. He told, yeah, these young boys, they don't know that I have changed my attitude. So they never knew it. So they are not to be blamed. So one day they came and they threw stones on me and I was badly hurt. Yes, and that is the main reason for my being so weak. And now the brahmachari, instead of praising the snake, just scolded him. What he scolded is something very nice. I have told you not to bite, but why didn't you hiss? That's the thing, message. That I have told you not to bite. The others, when others are hurting you, you need not hurt them back by biting, by just pouring the poison. But what was the harm in hissing? Just to raise the hood and hiss. That itself would have been sufficient to save yourself. So as a householder, without any sense of vengeance, that enemy is there to harm me, my family, myself, so I have to protect, or my society, just to protect, just the way the police works. If you find the police are instructed that way, that for all the things which the so-called criminal is doing, the society is going to bear the burden of it. So to restrict that, they are there. At the same time, you will find, however the person, the so-called criminal, may be abusing the police, you will find they try to keep themselves as much restrained as possible, behaving very nicely. The same thing, the idea is the same. It's not to take revenge. That person is behaving because of certain background in which he has grown up, and most probably he is helpless. All those, the way he has came out, the experiences of life has made him that way. So just to blame him bluntly won't serve any purpose. He is the victim of the circumstances, and that's what the nature is. Personally, I have no sense of revenge for him. But at the same time, his or her ways is going to harm others. So why not I hiss, just to make a show of anger, but at the same time, without any real sense of revenge. So that's the way one has to be a hero, by hissing, not by biting. To his enemies, the householder must be a hero. Them, he must resist. That is the duty of the householder. He must not sit down in a corner and weep and talk nonsense about non-resistance. As the snake did that mistake, as we do that mistake by speaking of that highest ideal, which is not to be implemented at the present state, in the present circumstances. If he does not show himself a hero to his enemies, he has not done his duty. And to his friends and relatives, he must be as gentle as a lamb. So this, the switching of the personality, yes, we see it, we saw it in our Swamis when they're facing, when I was in the school, I've seen some of the senior Swamis who are experienced in that work. The moment they have to scold some student, you feel they're so terribly angry, scolding, and the next moment someone comes, some guest comes, and you find that when they're talking to them, there's no trace of that anger. It is immediately vanished, just like changing the gear. When you are, in this, now all the vehicles are automated, in those mechanical gear system, that you cannot run the car in the same gear. You have to have various gear. So as a householder, we also have to have those gears, so that immediately, as per the situation, we should have the capacity to change our behavior. That not a particular trait of behavior should become a tag for me. So that's the thing, that when it comes to the friends and relatives, he must be as gentle as a lamb. It is the duty of the householder not to pay reverence to the wicked, because if he reverences the wicked people of the world, he patronizes wickedness, and it will be a great mistake if he disregards those who are worthy of respect, the good people. So here again, that all this actually has some other implications also. That we are not supposed to pay reverence to the wicked, but at the same time we shouldn't hate them. When you are not paying reverence, the real attitude is indifference, not hatred. Why? Know it for certain, hatred is nothing but negative attachment. It's a negative way of attachment. You will find, we all find in our life, whom I hate intensely, I remember him or her more intensely than the one whom I love. They are always in our mind. And that way what we are doing, we are culturing some negativity. Why I hate? Because of such and such character traits of that person, I hate him, tremendously hate him. I forget one thing, I'm constantly culturing those negative traits in the name of hatred. That is always in my mind. So the best thing is be indifferent. So whom you hate, know it for certain, if you go on hating a person, you will be culturing those negative traits, and that is going to, what you culture, that becomes your trait. I am bound to develop those traits. There's a wonderful story in our Puranas. There's Vishnu's two gatekeepers, Jaya and Vijaya. The stories are very interesting. That how hatred is a negative love, in a negative way of attachment. In a negative way, it is an attachment. The whom you hate, actually you are attached to him tremendously. You can never forget. So Jaya and Vijaya were the security of Vishnu in Golaka. Now one day the four Kumaras, when first God created the creation, Brahma created, first he created this four Kumaras, the eternal children. Why the children? They never had any, all those blemishes which we as an adults try to have, as we grow, all the blemishes which inherently we develop, those things never came to their mind. They were that they had an eternal renunciation, they had the purity. These four Kumaras always attached to God. So as the purpose of creation was not served by them, then Brahma went for the second attempt, and then we were created. In the first attempt was a failure because he created extremely pure these four souls. So these four souls, eternally perfect, one day came to Golaka to meet Vishnu. Now the two security, this Jaya Vijaya, couldn't recognize them. And they never allowed. They were just insisting, please allow us. So these two securities were not allowing them to meet Vishnu. Now these four Kumaras were so eager to meet Vishnu that they really got angry when they saw these two guards are not allowing them. So they cursed that you are having such a responsibility without undertaking your responsibility in a proper way. You're just using your power as if. So they cursed. You are not supposed to enjoy this privilege of being the security of Vishnu. You will have to again take birth as a human being. You have to it will be a fall for you. Now these two security really became afraid that they are going to lose their position. In the meantime, Vishnu came and he told, see that what you have done is not proper. These Kumaras, what they have cursed, it can never be taken back. Even I don't have the power. So now as they have told you have to take birth as human beings, so now I keep a condition for you. So as they were pleading to Vishnu, please save us, he told, now we keep a condition. What's the condition? That if you are born as my devotee, then you have to take 7 human births. And if you are born as my enemy, then only 3 human births. So what do you choose? So naturally they chose that to be born as an enemy, because in 3 births they will again regain back their position. And then as the story says, in the first birth they were this Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu, In the next birth, they were this Kumbhakarna and Shishupala, Ravana and Kumbhakarna, and in the third birth, they were this Kanksha and Shishupala. So in the three avatars, they came as the enemies of the avatar, and that's how they were released. So why we just related this story to show that hatred towards something negative is actually a type of attachment. We start culturing. So the best attitude is indifference. I am not at all interested about that person. That's the way when I'm passing through the street and any other passerby passes me, I neither have any good feeling nor bad feeling for that person. So that should be the attitude. Actually, in Yoga Sutra, we will come later when we are also studying Yoga Sutra. A sutra is there, wonderful sutra there is there, which actually depicts this trait. So it is the duty of the householder not to pay reverence. That doesn't mean you have to show hatred. Don't pay reverence, neither have hatred, be indifferent to the wicked. Because if he reverences the wicked people of the world, he patronizes wickedness, and it will be a great mistake if he disregards those who are worthy of respect, the good people. So there again, it is a question of love. Here it is not indifference. We have really show love and respect. So by showing that, we not only give the proper value to that person, I also inculcate those values by culturing them in my mind. So we should show respect. That's how we culture the goodness. He must not be gushing in his friendship. He must not go out the way making friends everywhere. So he should be very careful while making friends. Nowadays in the Facebook, you get so many friend requests. What do? You first try to evaluate the one who has sent the request, and then only you think of accepting that friendship. So it's not just limited to the social media. In our day-to-day life, most probably we lose that faculty. In while having friends in Facebook, we culture those faculties, but not in our day-to-day life. There we should we should not gush out. Means indiscriminately, whoever we find, we should not go on making friends. As a householder, I have the responsibility, because once the friendship is made, then if the person is not up to my standards, then a lot of complications will arise. So be very careful while moving out to reaching out for friendship. So one must not be gushing in his friendship. He must not go out the way making friends everywhere. He must watch the actions of the men he wants to make friends with and their dealings with other men, reason upon them, and then make friends. So we will stop here today. So you will find that how in details, as if covering each and every aspect of our life, the Mahanirvana Tantra is instructing the householder the way they can lead way of ideal life. So we will continue again in our next class. So now if I found someone raise their hands, if anyone has some question, may please ask now. Yeah, please.
So, Swamiji, I just have not a question, more I want to convey how clearly you have explained in a very simple way the good qualities of a householder. Sometimes in my life so far, I have gone through stages where you always have this conflict between who do you stay friends with, who do you not stay friends with, and all. I think today your examples of Ramakrishna, Vivekananda's, and your own explanation from your life experience has been most helpful and very commendable. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you. Namaste.
Swamiji, I just want to clarify something, sorry.
Yeah, please.
You know how you said hatred is a negative attachment, we keep it always within us.
Yeah.
And then you gave that story of 4 Kumaras, and they chose to have 3 lives as an enemy of Vishnu. Is that symbolizing that because in that 3 lives they were enemies, so they were too close, too attached?
No, so, yeah. As
I got confused, sorry.
Yeah. So the question there means in Bhagavatam in one another place it is mentioned Yena Tena Prakarena ishte mano niveshayat, means by hook or by crook, keep your mind in God. Because what's the idea? That God is such a personality that if you're hating some person, at last you have to search something negative in him. That only you can hate. And you will find in all those stories of whether it is Ravana or it is Kumbhakarna or it is Shishupala Karna, you will find through hatred at last they come to a position where they find only the goodness in the person which they hate. They find that it was the lack of their proper understanding which actually made them to hate. And now they find the person whom they were hating is actually all good. But at the same time, they have already developed the habit of thinking of that person through that head. Now that thinking has now made him to just think of God becomes very easy. Now only the hatred becomes love at last. And you will find in all those stories at last, when they are dying, they're merging with the divine. It cannot happen. The enemy cannot merge with me. So they all realize at last that the hatred was actually ill-directed. The God has kept that understanding, kept that misunderstanding actually to help them. It was a blessing in disguise. But in our life, when we are hating someone else, it's very, very genuine. You know, it's very easy to find out the negative traits in others. Very easy. Why you know? Swamiji in one place has told a very interesting thing. We easily find out the negative traits in others, not the good things. You know why? Very nice thing he's saying. You will be really amazed what he's saying. That all the negative traits are common to the entire humankind. Maybe he has expressed, I haven't expressed, but it is common, it is there. But the goodness which is in him or her, the other person, that is something very specific to that person. He or herself, he himself or herself have developed it. The entire humanity is not actually sharing that. And that's why we cannot relate to the goodness. Very easily we can relate to the evil things. So when we are relating the evil in others, we should be aware that evil is in me. That's why I can easily find it in others. And that's why the caution should be from my side, from within. And the best way is to be indifferent. That will help us to, just like an ointment, to guard me from the infection. I don't use a weapon to kill him. I use an ointment in the name of indifference to guard me from the infection, the viral infection, in the name of all those. But I have the tendency to get infected. That I should always agree. And just to save that, be humble enough that I have the tendency to get infected. To save myself, I am using the ointment of indifference. So that's the idea.
Thank you, Swamiji. Yeah, no, it makes sense. Thank you.
So shall we stop? Swamiji? Namaskar.
Hari Om Swamiji.
Hari Om, Hari Om.